Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are on Matthew chapter 14, and also this is we get 2 for 1 inaugural day and Martin Luther King's the celebration of Martin Luther King's birthday. So, um, but we're going to talk about the beheading of John the Baptist. Um, And as Matthew is telling the story, we're going to get some insight into why John was beheaded. One, John was beheaded. Well, you have to understand the political climate of the time. He is going to be beheaded by Herod. Herod, um, the tetrarch. Herod was a puppet government set up by Rome. Now, his father, if you go back to the beginning of Matthew, his father ruled the Judean, actually, probably, I want to say maybe even all of Israel, but it was his rulership was set up by Rome. Now, when we talk about the kings of Israel, you have all of the kings up until I can't think of his name. Zedekiah, I believe his name was, and I might be pronouncing it wrong. Um, but let me see if I can get this right quick. But all of the kings. Um, let's see where I can find this quickly. Um, Second Chronicles would be good. Uh, so let's see. This is not what I was looking for, though. All right. Uh, Jehoiakim, I believe, is the last king, and then he was taken to Israel. Now, the reason why I'm going through all this is because when you talk about the kings, and of course they're chronicled in the First and Second, actually Samuel, excuse me, First and Second Samuel, First and Second King, First and Second Chronicles. And so they span the period of time of the king, which is about 1,000 years, and up until the Babylonian exile. So that's pretty much was the last king. Then you have the after the Babylonian exile, you have the rulers. Okay, for example, you see the name Zerubbabel. He was a ruler post um, Babylonian exile. Now, from the Babylonian exile, Israel was never sort of a sovereign nation, freestanding. They were under the rule of the world dominating kingdoms at the time. So, starting with Babylon, then the Medes and the Persian, then the Grecian kingdom, and then the Roman kingdom. And then in AD 70, they were completely wiped out. And until 1947, when they became a nation again. So, what happens is during the Roman Empire, they set up, and Rome would allow the people that they conquered to a degree to retain some of their culture, religion, just as long as it didn't interfere with Rome. So what Rome set up was two sort of government, the Sanhedrin, which really was the religious side, but then you also had the political side, which was Herod. Now this Herod that we're going to see here, it was his father that ruled under Rome, and then when he died, his you can say his territories were divided into his 4 different sons. And so this is the Herod. He was a wicked man, and he and then another part of the political climate was that they had to keep the people in control. You even see this with the Pharisees, that they were always mindful of factions rising up because they didn't want to hear from Rome. And basically, Rome's attitude was that if you can't keep your people in check, we will, which means it's not going to go well with the Sanhedrin, meaning the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and other groups, and or Herod. So, so now, and by the way, you're going to see what's going to be very interesting is Herod is never really saw Jesus. He never will see Jesus face to face until Jesus is arrested. And when Pilate finds out that Herod was kind of the, tetrarch over, or the ruler over the Galilee area, and then Herod would be in Jerusalem at the time. He sends Jesus to Herod, and then Herod did not. Jesus did not pay any attention to Herod, even though he was trying to get Jesus to make perform a miracle. Now, verse 14, he says, "At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus. And this is John the Baptist, he told his servants. He hath been raised from the dead. That is why supernatural powers are at work in him." So you can see the superstition that they held. Now he's getting ready to tell why Herod, is thinking this, because he killed him, and then all of a sudden he hears about Jesus. Now again, you may think, well, you mean as popular as Jesus was, why hasn't Herod heard about it? Understand that he didn't mix with the common people. That's one. So it's quite easily to understand why he was insulated, and not necessarily knowing who Jesus was, other than hearing reports about him. Verse 3, "For Herod had arrested John, chained him, and put him in prison on the account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, since John had been telling him, 'It is not lawful for you to have her.' Though he wanted to kill him, he feared the crowd, since they regarded him as a prophet." Now you see that this was something that even the Pharisees always feared, and never underestimate crowd, the influence of crowd. In other words, you see this today in our political climate. Think about how easily a crowd could be incited. January 6th, right? Just think about that, January 6th. Now, in this case, they would have been more afraid of January 6th because Rome would have said, under that scenario, y'all can't control y'all people. And then Rome would have stepped in and then would have taken control. Okay. So Herod and the Pharisees enjoyed a lot of freedom, as corrupt as they were. Rome didn't care. See, the political climate was a lot different than what we think of in our political climate. Pretty much the Pharisees and Herod, all they had to do was to make sure that there was no insurrections, okay? Had to make sure that the people paid their taxes. They didn't really care about their religion. And in Herod's case, Herod was a degenerate. So Rome didn't care about this as long as, again, he kept control of the people. Now, what is also interesting about this scenario is that later on in our history, you do see the conflict between the religious side and the political side. You have to be a history buff to really get into that. Why you could have such disdain, like the Pharisees had great disdain for Herod, even though they were just as guilty of debauchery as he was, but they were the religious people. Now, both had to answer to Rome, and that's the difference. They both had to answer to Rome. Now, in our case, think about this. In our case, we answer to the Constitution. What is of great interest is how there are people who would love to change the Constitution. But I digress. But Rome was the absolute power, the absolute authority. That's what I meant to say. The absolute authority. Both had to answer to them. So that's why when he said that when John came along, everybody gravitated to John, and so Herod just couldn't kill him. Just couldn't kill him. That's why even the Pharisees with Jesus, they just couldn't kill him. They tried, but again, they didn't want the people, right? The people had saw him as a prophet, so to kill the prophet, that would have caused an uprising. Now, John the Baptist, of course, he is a shining example of a righteous person, especially in this atmosphere of darkness, whether it's the Pharisees on the religious side or Herod on the political side. Herod was a Jew. And this is why this is why John the Baptist rebuked him, because Herod had married his brother's wife. Okay? Now, by the way, the law forbid that. The law said, no, you can't do that. And so you can see the debauchery, you can see the debased character of Herod, that even he was doing things, even though it was against the law. And here comes this righteous man. Now, for years, right, no one ever opposed him. Here comes John the Baptist, a righteous man, and he rebukes him. And that irritated John. It incited Herod, for murder. He hated John the Baptist for that. And you know who else hated him? His wife. Okay. So, he said, it's not lawful for you to have her. He was breaking the law of Moses. Now, you also got to kind of wonder, too, why didn't the Pharisees rebuke him? But anyway, it doesn't tell us, but, that's just a question I had. Verse 6 says, but when Herod's birthday celebration came, Herodias' daughter danced before them and pleased Herod. So he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. And prompted by her mother, she answered, give me John the Baptist's head here on the platter. Although the king regretted it, he commanded that it be granted because of his oath and his guests. So he sent orders and had John beheaded in prison. His head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. Then his disciples came and removed his corpse and buried it and reported it to Jesus. Now, let's kind of go back and unpack this. Now, Matthew, when we get to Luke, we're going to see that Herodias, which really in reality was John the Baptist's sister-in-law. Okay. Now, I'm kind of reminded of a famous family who did this. One of the brothers married his brother's wife. Now, it's kind of interesting. Anyway, and it's very interesting. I'm kind of drawing parallels here because it's a very, very famous family. And you kind of almost wonder why anyway, I don't want to get too far from that because but again, people with power and then access to, I don't know how to say this, access to kind of whatever they can get you always wonder, for example, why would Herod want his sister-in-law? Now, when John rebuked them, when John the Baptist rebuked them and said, "It is you have an unlawful marriage." Now, this is interesting here. We're going to get later on, like I said, we're going to come back as we go through the gospel. This is the idea of marriage, the God kind of marriage, and the idea of when people do things, and we live in a culture today, in a church culture. There are a lot of unbiblical marriages. There are a lot of unbiblical divorces and remarriage that would garner this kind of rebuke. I was a good friend of mine. It was kind of amazing when he told me he had divorced his wife and then he remarried. The sad part is, you could say he's in a good marriage today, right? But it's an ungodly marriage because he divorced and remarried. And what's interesting is that had he been patient and waited, his first wife would have came back to the Lord, and I guess living according to living. She's living for the Lord. It's interesting. And again, I'm digressing here. Now, so here you have, but this Herod was doing this because of just his debased nature. He did it, lust, whatever. But notice this, and you can also tell that family dynamics. The daughter danced. So here you have this celebration, and then some kind of way, the daughter danced. Now she danced a lewd sexual dance. And this dance had to be something to the point that like I say, it rivals strippers today. Because the lewdness of the dance so incited him that he was like, "Ooh, I'll give you whatever you want." Right? Whatever you want. Now, we're going to see this in the other gospel where he said, "I'll give you whatever you want up to half the kingdom." And that was sort of a standard kind of generic way of saying, I'll just give you whatever you want. It was certainly understood she wasn't going to get whatever she could ask for. Like, for example, she was never going to get his kingdom. But here was the bizarre thing here, that this he was so incited by this lustful sexual dance that he said, "Okay, I'll give you whatever." And you can let your imagination kind of run wild too, of whatever else was going on. That this is how debased this was. Now, what Matthew is not pointing out is that when John rebuked Herod for marrying her, the mother nursed hatred towards John, and this was her opportunity to really seek vengeance. So when the daughter danced and incited all of the lustful men, and then he go, "Hey, I'll give you whatever you want." Then she has to go and confer with the father. Well, confer with her mother. What should I ask for? And here is even the more bizarre thing. Think about this. She probably could have asked for money. She probably could have asked for even a position. But notice what she asked for. The head of John the Baptist. That's bizarre. Of all the stuff she could have asked for, she could have secured her place in the kingdom. Because at that point, her place wasn't. She was a woman. So even though she enjoyed through an unbiblical marriage, he could have gotten rid of her at any time. She could have secured that. In other words, there were a lot of things she could have asked for, but she asked for the head of John the Baptist. So that was, and here you see John being martyred because of his faith, because of his righteous stand. This is, you can almost say, a prelude to come for Christians. That they would die, Christians will die for their faith because of their because of the hatred that people are hatred for. In fact, in Matthew 24, we will see this. Jesus will warn us to say, hey, that's coming. Here is the most bizarre thing. So they cut John the Baptist's head, put the head on the platter, and then brings the head to Herodias. What kind of satisfaction do you suppose she could have got from that? Right? Suppose, she has the platter and she's looking at this rotting corpse of a head. What satisfaction? Other than you're dead. Because she certainly couldn't keep it long because it's going to start rotting and stinking. So it's very, very bizarre, okay, that she would, very bizarre, okay, and it also shows you the power of hatred, the power of sin, the power of hatred, that she hated him because he spoke truth. And it should not be, we as, by the way, believers should always be prepared for that kind of persecution. We may not ever, especially in America, you can say we may not ever suffer that. From a political perspective, from a religious perspective, we might have some deranged person that may kill us because of our faith. By and large, we don't. And a lot of people were afraid of speaking out against Herod and his evil ways, speaking out against the Pharisees and his evil ways. But all right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective, and the Bible Plain and Simple. And if you have any thoughts or comment, add to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I'll see you in the next study.